to Grain IQ. I'm your host, Chad Moyer. Grain marketing is a critical part of your operation in keeping it profitable. And here at Grain IQ, we strive to help you better understand the markets. And this podcast, in that effort, is a joint project between the Nebraska Rural Radio Association and the Nebraska Soybean Board. On today's program, we welcome to the stage here today, Jacquie Holland. She is with the American Soybean Association, and we will be talking about the soybean crush, why that is important, and again, how that influences grain marketing and specifically soybean marketing. Before we talk to Jacquie, I do have a favor for you, the listener. If you would, hit the subscribe button on your podcast platform. That helps us reach many more people like you. If you like the content, share it with a friend, give us a like, do whatever you can to help us share this information. We really appreciate it here at Grain IQ. Well, Jacquie, thanks for taking the time and visiting with us here today. We're going to talk about the soybean crush and what that means. And there's been a lot of interest in the soybean crush in the soybean industry here recently. We're going to talk about kind of how we got to this point and what things might look like in the future. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about you. And I understand you're kind of a recent acquisition for the American Soybean Association, but tell us about your background and kind of the things that you've done in your career.
Yes. So I grew up on a dairy farm in northwestern Illinois, had to do a lot of chores growing up, a lot of early morning milkings. And when I got off the farm, I was determined to never go back. However, here we are talking about soybeans. So I got my master's from Purdue in agricultural economics. I worked in the food manufacturing space for a little while. And most recently, I was a grain market analyst at Farm Futures, which is one of the national farm publications out there. For ASA, I just started recently as an economist working with Scott Gert and the rest of the team. So very excited to be here.
All right. Very good. Well, so you said you do have that, I guess, that base knowledge, right? Growing up on the farm and, understanding what happens on the farm. So you do understand the importance of having a grain marketing plan and following through on it. Give us today's topic is the soybean crush. And obviously, you take beans in, right? And you have two main products that come off of that, soybean oil and soybean meal. Can you give us kind of a perspective of that part of the soybean industry? Where has crush come from and kind of where are we at right now in that portion of the soybean industry?
Yeah, of course. So historically, we know that soybean meal has been an important feed additive for livestock and poultry rations. I believe last time I looked, about 60% of U.S. soybean meal is consumed by the poultry industry. Growing up, my perception of the crush was that it was always driven by feed demand. However, as in the last few years, we've seen new regulations particularly from California, that find consumers pushing for more greener options for their fuel selection. And as a result of that, we are seeing an increase in oil companies working with the soybean industry, with the vegetable oils industry, to be able to utilize those oils to make renewable fuel that has a lower carbon intensity score that is really being driven by consumers. A lot of that has originated, as I mentioned, in California, but in recent years, we've seen that spread further east. And as a result of that, we have seen many new joint partnerships between oil between energy companies and particularly food processors as they look to increase that capacity, the availability of vegetable oils as an additive for or as a key component of renewable diesel production. So that's kind of the short history of it.
Yep. I remember there were a number of years ago that there was really a push for biodiesel. And now there's the term renewable diesel. Those are two different things, right? But they would both have an impact on soybean crush and the soybean industry, right?
Yes. So originally we did see the push for biodiesel, and the big push that the industry is undergoing right now is with renewable diesel or bio-based diesel. So to that end, we're seeing that soy oil is a much more critical feedstock in that production. And because of that, we have seen all of these plant announcements in recent years that these soy crush plants are expanding to increase oil output in order to be able to sell it to the refiners to make renewable diesel.
Sure. Could you explain, so you have a whole soybean, right? And part of that soybean is meal, part of that soybean is oil. Can you describe or verbalize how does that break out? And then when you do that, what part of a values of a soybean, how much of that comes from the meal and how much of that comes from the oil?
Yeah, so in a bushel of soybeans weighs about 60 pounds. Of that 60 pounds, about 12 pounds of oil is produced and about 47 pounds of meal is produced. So you're looking at about 20% oil produced from a soybean seed. And from a value perspective, that's kind of where, that's where this conversation is evolving. Because with the increased demand for the oil, we're seeing that the percentage of oil that drives those plant crush margins has been increasing as we've seen the demand for oil pickup. Yep. So looking at the July crush spread of those three components, soybean futures, soybean meal futures, and soybean oil futures, right now oil comprises about 37% of the value of that crush spread. And soybean meal comprises about 63%. So that tells us that soybean meal still is the driving influence for crush that is driving crush margins right now. But we have seen that percentage that can be attributed to oil. We've seen that pick up, and we can expect to see that pick up as that demand increases.
Yeah. And so it's important to notice that, right? Because like you say, there are two, there's the value of the soybeans. What can the crusher buy them for? And they're going to turn around and sell two products. They're going to sell the oil and they're going to sell the meal. And hopefully they sell those at a profit. But even with soybean oil at 20% of the bean, but still responsible for over 30% of the value, you can see there's that interest in it. Maybe, Jacquie, could you elaborate on where this interest is coming from? What has led to the interest in soybean oil here over the last several years?
So that soybean oil is a critical component for feedstocks for these crush plants, especially as these renewable diesel plants are getting started with their operations. Soy oil is really is really the most efficient product they can use to get their operations up and going. So that's really been the key driver that we've seen there, especially, as we're looking, we're in the middle of our growing season right now, but as we're looking down the road, in a couple months, we're expecting to see a few more plants open. So that's really going to start to increase the value of that oil as these plants get up and running, and they need that soy oil feedstock to get going.
Yep. All right. Let's talk about the destination of those products. We know the soybeans come from the farm. They go to the crusher. What about on the backside of these plants? Let's start out on the soybean meal side. Who are the big utilizers of soybean meal?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, the poultry industry consumes a lot. I believe the hog industry is not too far behind with, I think, about 17%. And then dairy and beef are also in the mix. So it's a very critical component, for a lot of livestock that is fed across the U.S.
Do we export a lot of soybean meal as well, or do we use the majority of it domestically?
We use a lot of it domestically. However, the anticipation is that with more meal available from the increased crush, that we are going to start to see more exports going out of the Gulf.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about on the oil side? Obviously, a lot of attention on renewable diesel. Is that the only use of soybean oil on the backside?
No, soybean oil is also, I was talking with a friend the other day looking at our packets of Chick-fil-A sauce. There's soybean oil in Chick-fil-A sauce. It's a very common additive used, especially with dressings. Anywhere that, you need to see some more taste and texture, it can be added as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Very good. Let's talk, I guess you made the mention that there's a lot of interest in soybean oil, a lot of interest in soybean crush. You're an economist, so maybe you can talk about when you're looking at placing a soybean crush plant somewhere. We talked about, I think there's been a new one in North Dakota, one in South Dakota. I think we had one in Nebraska that just started receiving soybeans, and another one will come online here in the next year. I've heard a lot of other plants are retooling their plants. So tell me what goes into siting a soybean crush plant? What do they look at when they try and figure out where would be a good place to put one?
So the key cost is going to be looking at the cost of soybeans, right? So these plants are looking at areas where they're seeing basis opportunities that will allow them to source these soybeans affordably and efficiently to keep their costs under control so that they can be profitable, so that everybody can be profitable at the end of the day. So, looking at areas where there's opportunities for more soybeans to be produced cheaply and efficiently, and to be brought to market within a reasonable distance. So I think Northeast Nebraska definitely fits the mold for that, which is why we saw the creation of the Norfolk crush plant there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So is it difficult? Well, I don't know if this is a loaded question or not, but is it easier to find the soybeans like what you described, or is it easier to find a place to go with the products? You know what I mean? Is it easier to manage the inbound of the plant or the outbound of the plant?
That's a very good question. And I've worked in plant settings before. So I can't speak specifically to soybeans, but I mean, the inbound, my experience has been that the inbound is critically important. I mean, it doesn't make sense to ship soybeans from the Eastern Corn Belt to the Western Corn Belt when they can be grown affordably in the Western Corn Belt as well. So, from a demand standpoint, we are seeing a lot more of these renewable diesel plants pop up in, further west in the Corn Belt than, than we have seen previously. So, from my perspective, I think it is very much input driven.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that kind of brings us up to present, I would say, on the conversation of soybean crush and, specifically the use of renewable diesel and things like that. What about as you look at your the dynamics that are in play now, where we're at with U.S. soybean production, where we're at with South American production, and all of those things? What does the future look like for the soybean crush industry? What are your thoughts about where we go from here?
I definitely, it's a very bullish story, and it's one that we've been very excited to talk about because there are so many opportunities. Domestic crush expansion our domestic crush capacity, it is going to grow 30% since 2022. That's an incredible amount of growth in a very short amount of time. So there's going to be there should be a lot of good basis opportunities for farmers in the areas where these plants are coming online. And it's going to create more opportunities for more value-added soybean products as well. We have more meal. We are going to be able to be a more competitive player in the global soybean export market. And the soybean oil going into renewable diesel, that's also going to help reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels we burn. So there's a lot of really good economic reasons to be very bullish about the soybean industry right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the opportunity for exports. I've wondered about that too with, Argentina just has such a tremendous crush industry in within their borders. Are we going to expand enough? Are we going to have enough size and scale that we could be a competition for those products in the world market? What do you think about that, Jackie?
That's a good question. That's definitely something that we're watching. The U.S. doesn't have a high soy meal market export footprint right now. So we know that there are opportunities, and we definitely saw that last year, that the U.S. is capable of rising to those soy meal export opportunities when Argentina had their drought and all of their production shortfalls. We also know that our domestic hog herd has the availability to consume a little bit more soybeans in their rations. And ultimately we know that the markets will balance and that we are going to find ways to put these extra value added products to work.
Yep. All right. Jackie, I guess those are all the questions that I have for you. I give you one more opportunity in this conversation with the importance. We know just how important that crush is to the soybean farmer. What do you want to make sure farmers remember about this segment of the soybean industry, and again, how that might play into their risk management plans? Recognizing its importance, what do you want to make sure they remember?
Yeah, I think for the longest time, soybean prices for farmers, it seemed like we're so dependent on the export market. And with this growing domestic crush capacity, this means that farmers are going to have more buyers for their soybeans. So there's going to be more basis opportunities, particularly this fall at harvest as more of these plants start to get online. So I think it's a great opportunity, I think it's a great opportunity for more price discovery, for more price appreciation for soybean farmers, which is going to be fantastic for the rural economy and our national economy at large.
Yep. All right. Jacquie, thanks for taking the time and visiting with us today. Appreciate the insight and the information, okay?
Thank you.
Again, that's Jacquie Holland. She is an economist with the American Soybean Association, recapping the importance of soybean crush. What does that mean to the soybean industry? And again, what does that mean for our marketing opportunities and risk management? Thank you for joining us on Grain IQ on today's podcast. Again, if this is your first one, welcome. We do have quite a suite of existing podcasts as well, prior episodes. So I'd invite you to go and listen to those. And of course, join us for the next episode of Grain IQ. I'm Chad Moyer.
Grain IQ is a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association with support from the Nebraska Soybean Board. It is brought to you in part by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Grain IQ is hosted by Chad Moyer and produced by Rebel Saklocha. It is written and edited by Alex Makovica. Our project manager is Bryce Duskett. You can listen to Grain IQ on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or online at ruralradionetwork.com.